You tapped your card this morning. Coffee, maybe gas, something small. You held a piece of plastic near a terminal for less than a second. A light blinked green, and a person you'll never think about again handed you something. You didn't count anything. You didn't sign anything. You didn't wait. You didn't even really look. And in that half second, in the space between the tap and the green light, your money went on a journey across 4 different companies, 3 separate computer systems, and in some cases, 2 continents. It came back approved before your hand left the counter. You have no idea who any of them were. You'd assume the obvious thing, that your bank moved the money. That's what banks do. Your money sits with them. They send it where you point it. Everything else is just plumbing you don't need to understand. That's not what happened. Because somewhere inside that half second, a company you have never bought anything from took a small piece of your coffee. Not a bank, not a store, not a lender. A company that manufactures nothing, ships nothing, holds no inventory, lends you no money, and takes almost no risk that you won't pay. That company keeps roughly half of every dollar it earns as pure profit. Half. Most businesses on Earth fight and die over 5%. So what exactly are you paying it for? Hold that question. It's stranger than it looks. Start in 1968 with a man named D. Hock. Hock was a mid-level bank employee in Seattle, working for an institution that had signed up for a licensing program run by Bank of America. The program was a disaster. Bank of America had mailed out unsolicited credit cards by the tens of thousands to people who hadn't asked for them, and in some cases couldn't afford them. And the licensee banks around the country were drowning in fraud, unpaid balances, and paperwork that physically could not be processed fast enough. The obvious fix was for one bank to seize control and run it properly. Hock proposed the opposite. He argued the system should be owned by all the banks and controlled by none of them. No headquarters that could dictate terms, no single owner with an incentive to squeeze the others. Just a shared set of rules, how a transaction moves, how disputes resolve, who gets paid what, and how fast, that every member agreed to follow because following them was more valuable than not. He wasn't building a company, he was building an agreement. That agreement became Visa. And here's the thing that took decades to become obvious. The agreement was the asset, not the cards, not the terminals, not the buildings, the rules themselves, and the fact that everyone had already agreed to them. Now fast forward to your coffee. When you tap, 4 parties are involved. There's you, there's the merchant, there's the merchant's bank, which needs to receive the money, and there's your bank, which needs to send it and to guarantee you're good for it. Notice what's missing from that list. The network isn't a party to your transaction. It doesn't hold your money for a single second. It doesn't decide whether you're approved. Your bank does that. It doesn't take the loss if you never pay your statement. Again, your bank does that. And that's why banks are compensated so heavily. The merchant pays a fee of roughly 1.5% to 3%. The overwhelming majority of that goes to your bank to cover the risk it's carrying and to fund the rewards points that convinced you to carry that particular card in the first place. The network keeps a sliver, around 0.1%. That's it. On your $5 coffee, the network's cut is well under a penny, which sounds like a terrible business right up until you look at the volume. In its 2025 fiscal year, Visa processed 257.5 billion transactions and booked $40 billion in net revenue. Net income was $20.1 billion. Its net margin has sat in the neighborhood of 50% for years. 50 cents of profit on every dollar of revenue, from a company whose entire job is to be the place the message passes through. But margin alone isn't the answer to the question. Plenty of software companies have great margins and still die. The real question is why nobody has taken this away. For that, you need 2 economists. In the early 2000s, Jean-Charles Roche and Jean Tirole published work on what they called two-sided markets. Businesses that don't sell to a customer so much as stand between 2 different groups who each need the other to show up first. Tirole would later win the Nobel Prize, in part for this line of thinking. Their insight was that these platforms have a chicken and egg problem that ordinary businesses never face. A card is worthless to you if no shops take it. Taking the card is worthless to a shop if nobody carries it. So the platform has to solve both sides simultaneously, and it usually does that by pricing them unevenly, subsidizing the side that's harder to attract, and charging the side that's already stuck. That's the rewards points. That's the cashback. That's the airline miles. You were never the customer being charged, You were the side being paid to show up. David Evans and Richard Schmalensky spent years mapping how this actually played out in the payment card industry specifically, tracing how a product that took decades to gain traction became something a merchant essentially cannot refuse. Their work makes the trap legible. Once enough people carry the card, a merchant's choice is no longer, do I want to pay this fee? It's, do I want to turn away 1 in every 3 customers who walks in? Nobody chooses that. And here's where it gets stranger. The barrier isn't technology. Moving a payment message between 2 banks is not a hard engineering problem. A well-funded startup could build a faster, cheaper network in a couple of years, and several have tried. The barrier is that a payment network is only worth what everyone else has already agreed to. You could build a perfect one tomorrow and it would be worth nothing on launch day because 0 merchants accept it and 0 people carry it. You'd need to convince hundreds of millions of consumers and tens of millions of businesses to switch on the same day, for no reason, before any of them get any benefit from switching. D. Hock's agreement, 60 years old, is a wall that money can't climb. So here's the flip. You've been thinking about this as a company that takes a cut. It isn't. Visa doesn't sell you a product. It doesn't even sell the merchant a product. What it sells is the absence of a question. The fact that when you walked into that shop this morning, it never once crossed your mind to wonder whether they'd take your money. The most profitable business in America sells nothing. It sells the thing you didn't have to think about. Sit with that, because it's a whole category, not a single company. The businesses that quietly own the modern world are almost never the ones that make the thing. They're the ones that became the place where the thing gets agreed on. The exchange, not the stock. The index, not the company. The standard, not the product. The rail, not the train. None of them are visible. That's not an accident. That's the requirement. A toll booth you notice is a toll booth you route around. And it isn't permanent. Governments have been pushing back on interchange fees for years, and in some regions, caps have already forced the numbers down. Newer rails move money directly between banks and skip the card networks entirely. The wall is high, but walls do come down, slowly and from the outside. If you want more videos that make ordinary objects look like machinery, subscribe. That's the whole channel. So, tomorrow morning, you'll tap your card, the light will go green, you won't count anything or sign anything or wait. But now you know what you're actually buying in that half second. And it isn't the coffee. You're paying a very small amount of money to a company you've never dealt with for the privilege of never having wondered whether this would work. That's not a scam. It's a real service, and it's worth something. It's just not the service you thought you were paying for, and it goes to someone you'd never have named. And that's the uncomfortable part, because knowing this changes nothing. You'll still tap. There's no version of your morning where you don't. The most invisible thing in your day is also the most expensive thing you own. Not because it costs much, but because you'd never give it up. You tapped your card this morning. You still have no idea who caught it. Keep looking closer.